us on LinkedIn and make sure to check out our website to stay tuned to the latest updates. So today's webinar will be most beneficial for environmental, HSE, and civil engineers and team leaders. So my name is Asin, and I'm the Commercial Director at Velosi. So I'm here with my colleagues, Mr. Ijaz, Mr. Tony, Mr. Faizan, and Ms. Gayatri, who are experts in this field with a collective experience of over 50 years. So you're all in good hands today. So during this webinar, we encourage you all to keep asking questions to clear any doubts. This can not only help you, but also many others who usually have similar doubts. You can type your queries in the Q&A window, and you'll either receive a reply in the window or live if you feel it's something that will benefit everyone. So we'll try our best to answer questions at the end of each section. But also another thing, please make sure to ask your queries in the Q&A window and not in the chat window. It'll be easier for us to track the questions and answer the questions. We'll also have a detailed Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Also, please accept our apologies if your question is not addressed. Due to the high volume of questions we usually receive, we have to be quite selective. We will also be issuing participation certificates to all those who have attended at least 80% of the webinar and have participated in the discussions through the Q&A. Since this is quite a technical subject, and today we'll be touching key theoretical and practical aspects of conducting an EIA study in this limited time of 2 hours, we request you all to please follow along with us and keep asking questions to help us in making this as engaging as possible. So today's webinar, as always, is based on a previous case study that we have conducted for a refinery in this case. Please note that the client name and data have been redacted. We will be following a practical approach where we will walk you through the key steps through this case study. Now, the main goal is that by the end of this webinar, you'll have a good understanding about the relevant codes, laws, methodology for conducting an EIA study, as well as the interpretation of the results. So before we begin, although most of us are in the comforts of our home, we should be aware of all emergency exits. Due to the current COVID-19 situation, we should keep a safe distance and in general, take care of ourselves and of those around us. So I'll start by giving a brief introduction about Velosi and what we do in general. So Velosi is a leading global consulting firm that provides asset integrity management, HSE, engineering, environmental, and software solutions to clients in the oil and gas, energy, power, and petrochemical industries around the world. We also have our own in-house proprietary software, Whale Plant, which is an industry-leading SAP-certified complete asset integrity solution software currently being used by leading oil and gas giants in the region. So the group was founded in 1982, and we have expanded our footprint to more than 38 countries worldwide, offering a full range of specialized consulting services tailored to the energy industry needs. Here's a map showing our worldwide existence. So by combining global coverage and local knowledge with our wide range of services, we are able to create tailored solutions to complex problems. So our range of interrelated services and integrated approach ensures that we can accommodate a wide range of projects. So the services we provide cover a broad range of industries, such as oil refineries, GOSPs, gas oil separation plants, gas and NGL plants, chemical plants, fertilizer plants, pipelines, offshore platforms, wellheads, and structures. So to go into a little more detail about the services we provide, so in asset integrity management services, we conduct risk-based inspection, pipeline integrity management system, structural integrity management system, SIL, wellhead integrity management system, RCM, and RAM. So we have conducted webinars on almost all of these service lines here in asset integrity management. Then moving on to HSE and environmental services. So we provide the complete scope of HSEI studies, risk assessment and management, HSE critical equipment and systems, environmental services, occupational health services, and emergency management and planning. Then in engineering services, we carry out conceptual design feed, detailed design and engineering consulting services, operating manuals and procedures, design verification and appraisal, fitness for service, and as-built drafting services. So we have conducted a webinar on fitness for service previously. Then moving on to software solutions. So we have our own in-house team of software development engineers. And over the years, we have developed various softwares being used by clients all over the world. Whale Plant is our asset integrity management software, which I mentioned earlier. Whale PHA, process hazard analysis software, which is used for HAZOP and SIL studies. Whale PSRA, petrol station risk assessment software. Whale MTS, it's an asset management software. Whale ERP, enterprise resource planning. Whale CTR, cost, time, and resource management. Whale Flow, which is a document approval workflow management system. And Whale Certificates, which is an online reporting portal. Then we also do audits and assessments, right? As you can see, the OSHA safety audits, technical audits, environmental audits, structural audits, right? Regulatory compliance audits, and so on. And we also do ISO certification and trainings for almost all the leading standards, such as 9001, 14001, right? 45001, and so on. And moving on to inspection, testing, and certification. So we also provide third-party inspection services, industrial and service inspection, NDT testing, both conventional and advanced, using our own in-house equipment, condition-based monitoring, statutory inspection and certification, tools and equipment calibration, lifting equipment inspection, testing and certification, along with technical trainings. So to provide these inspection services, here are some of our in-house equipment that we use to carry out these inspection services, such as for MFL, we have the floor map. For coating thickness measurements, we have the electrophysic mini test. For corrosion under insulation, we have the Edify lift. For LRUT, we have the Teletest Focus Plus. And then for ultrasonic thickness measurements, we have the Olympus 38DL. Then for positive material identification, we have the Olympus XRF analyzer. Tank weld inspection, we have the Edify V750 vacuum box. So Velosi has successfully executed over 600 plus projects with over 300 plus clients, including ADNOC, Dragon Oil, Saudi Aramco, Lukoil, and many, many more big names in the region. So here are some of our certifications. Here are some of our accreditations and approvals. And here are some of our memberships. So now I'll hand it over to Mr. Fazan, who'll start with today's topic.
Hello, good afternoon all of you, and thank you so much for your participation. My name is Fazan, I'm head of environment and Velosi. And now I'm going to start with a topic which is environmental impact assessment. Before going into the detail, first of all, we should know what is environmental impact assessment. So one by one, we will discuss about the components, methodology, and everything in detail. But before going into the detail, we would like to introduce what is the environmental impact assessment. Basically, environmental impact assessment is a living document, and it is a procedure which helps us to identify and assess the environmental impacts. Basically, there are the different kinds of the environmental impacts associated with the different kinds of the project. So environmental impact help us to identify the environmental impacts, and accordingly it help us to assess the environmental impacts as well. And on the basis of the identification and assessment, we can just determine the appropriate mitigation measures and the monitoring practices. So the first step is the identification of the environmental impacts, and then accordingly there are the different methods to assess the environmental impacts, and on the basis of the identification and the assessment, we can just determine and we can propose some mitigation measures and the monitoring practices. So this is about the environmental impact assessment. And now there are some stages, and there are some circumstances, and there are some scenarios where the EIA is required. So we should also know at which stage and at which circumstances and at which scenarios environmental impact is required. So we'll discuss and explain here as well. The most important part and the most important stage of environmental impact assessment is the possible early stage of the project. Why we require environmental impact assessment at the earliest stage of the project? So that we can put some design control in the project. If the project has a significant environmental impact, and if we do the environmental impact assessment at the earliest stage of the project, then we can just put some environmental control or the design control, so that the environmental impact of that particular project cannot be as significant. So the most favorable or the most suitable stage of the conducting the environmental impact assessment is the earliest stage of the project, to just verify the environment feasibility of the project, and in order to identify the environmental impact as environmental aspect for further consideration in the project phases as well. This is the basically the flow chart that we are just describing here, to just show that at which stage environmental impact assessment is required. So you all can see that there are the different stages of the project. For example, starting from the concept, feed, detail engineering, construction, operation, and the decommissioning. So the first step is the concept, and we have to conduct the ENVID. ENVID we will discuss and we will explain in the upcoming slides. And the next step is the feed. In the feed stage, we have to conduct the environmental impact assessment to cover the life cycle of the project, starting from the feed and going into the decommissioning as well. And then there is a detail engineering update of the EIA, which was conducted in the feed stage. And then the construction. In construction, we also need to conduct the ENVID, and if required, we have to conduct the environmental impact assessment as well. And then the next stage of the project, that is the operation phase, we have to conduct or we have to update the environmental impact assessment. And in the decommissioning stage, there are some kind of the project in which we require environmental impact assessment as well. So these are the project phases normal, and at each stage of the project, we have to thoroughly conduct the environmental impact assessment, or in some stages we have to update environmental impact assessment as well. But in some circumstances, we have to follow the legal authorities available in the region as well. In the relevant authority, they require only environmental impact assessment at the early stage of the project. Some authorities, or depending upon the project depending of the project and the nature of the facility, nature of the project, that authority can also ask environmental impact assessment during the operation phase as well. But there are some, so far we have discussed and we have explained what is the environmental impact assessment and when it is required. But there are some scenarios, some stages where environmental impact assessment is not required. Normally, there are the 3 stages, but the most important thing is that, or the most important point, that when EIA is not required, when the quantity or the quality of the existing discharges to the environment during the operational phase is not changed. If there is no change in the quality or the quantity of the discharge to the environment, then the environmental impact is not required. And then the next point is no requirement for new structures or the infrastructure, including additional camp facilities, utilities, access roads, and etc. And there are there is another point where the environmental impact assessment is not required, that is a no existing or the future land use conflict with the proposed project. So basically, so far we have discussed the 3 points when the environmental impact assessment is not required. The first point is when the quality and the quantity of the discharges is not changed, and the second point is when the new structure or the infrastructure, including the camps, facilities, access roads, are not required, and then the last point, when the no existing or the future land use conflict with the proposed project. So these are the 3 main conditions when the environmental impact assessment is not required. But there are some cases, there are some circumstances when the environmental impact assessment is also required. For example, artificial island. If there is a need of the development of the artificial island, we need to develop the detailed environmental impact assessment. Then there are the another case where environmental impact assessment is required, that is the existing facilities. EIA will be reviewed as a part of the HSE integrity assurance audit, including the environmental monitoring requirement for performance of emission control equipment and effluent standards. Sometimes it is the requirement of the facility, or if it is the requirement of the client, that they need to conduct 5 years or the 5 years HSE integrity assurance audit, or as per the client requirement, the frequency they can set. In that perspective, we also need to conduct the environmental impact assessment, either the existing facilities, either the controls are in place or not, or either the discharges that they are doing into the environment, they are in a control manners or not. At that particular point, we also need to conduct environmental impact assessment. And then there is a brownfield and the modification project. If the existing facility, if they want to expand the operations and if they want to modify the project, then at that stage we also need to conduct the environmental impact assessment. If there is an already existing facility and if they want any modification which feels that there is a significant environmental impact assessment, then we need to conduct environmental impact assessment in a detail. And next, there is a combined EIA as well. There are some kind of the project facilities, there are some kind of the project activities, there are some kind of the project itself where we need to conduct a combined phase environmental impact assessment. For example, the seismic surveys. In seismic survey, we need to combine, we need to make the combined environmental impact assessment. In this kind of a project, there is no feed, there is no detail engineering, there is no construction, there is no operation. So that's why we need to conduct environmental impact assessment for seismic survey. In the same way, the drilling, well testing, these are also the same kind of a project where there is no feed, there is no detail engineering, there is no construction, there is no as such operation separately. So that's why we need to conduct environmental impact assessment for these kind of a projects as well. Then if a facility or if the project is want to undergo due to the decommissioning or the demolition, then we have to assess the environmental impact as well, that what are going to be discharged, what are going to be impacted by the demolition and the decommissioning, we need to check. And to check, we have to conduct the environmental impact assessment in a detail for the decommissioning and demolition as well. So far, we have discussed, we have explained what is environmental impact assessment and what and when we have to conduct the environmental impact assessment and at what stage we don't need environmental impact assessment. Now, what we are going to do, now we are going to describe the environmental impact objectives. Basically, what are the objectives, why we need to carry out the environmental impact assessment. So the first of all, the first point, that is the objective of the environmental impact assessment to provide a detailed description of the environmental baseline condition. What is environmental baseline condition? We will explain in the upcoming slide. And one of the objective of the environmental impact assessment to just identify the impacts of the proposed project. What are the impacts which are be created by the proposed project? We have to identify, and environmental impact assessment, it is one of the procedure, as we explained in the first slide. And then on the basis of the description of the environmental baseline condition and on the basis of the impacts due to the proposed activity, then we can identify the potential mitigation and the monitoring efforts as required to control the environmental impacts, to just make the significant environmental impacts into the less or no significant environmental impact. Then we have to propose some mitigation and the monitoring efforts as well. So these are the main objectives of the environmental impact assessment. Now we will go into the detail, what are the legal framework and the applicable standards that are applicable, that bind the environmental impact assessment as a legal document. There are the different national and the environmental laws and the regulations. If I talk about, there are some guidelines, there are some regulations, In every territory, in every region, there are some specific guidelines, there are the specific environmental laws that bind the proposed or the proponent to conduct the environmental impact assessment at particular stage. There is no any territory, there is no any region where there is no regulation for the environmental impact assessment. There is every territory, every region, every country has a specific law that bind the project proponent to conduct the environmental assessment. Then there are some federal laws, there are the ministerial decrees, there are some international convention and the protocols. There are some international convention and the protocol that bind the country to conduct the environmental impact assessment at a specific stage of the project. Then there are some regional convention and the protocols. Then there are the ISO 14000 family as well. And there are some client specific standards as well. For example, there are some clients who have their own standard to conduct the environmental impact assessment. They have their own methodology to conduct the environmental impact assessment. They have their own strategy and they have their own criteria to conduct the environmental impact assessment. Now we are going into the detail, that is what is the EIA process and the components. So the key elements of the process of the environmental impact assessment, the first is the screening. The next one is the scoping, establishing the baseline assessment of the impacts, including the social impacts as required. There are some kinds of the project or the location. It depends on the location as well, where we need to conduct and evaluate the social impacts as well. Then establishing the mitigation measures and the commitments, and then on the basis of the mitigation measures, we have to develop environmental management framework or environmental management plan or the monitoring plans. So this is basically the flow chart that we describing. Basically the first step that we explained you before as well, that is the screening. Then we have to conduct the scoping study. In some circumstances it is also called the terms of the reference. And then after the screening and the scoping, then there is a detailed environmental impact assessment. In environmental impact assessment, then the project definition or hazard identification, or then we have to make the baseline data as well. We have to make the environmental profile, and on basis of all these things we have to predict the environmental impacts. What are the environmental impacts can be generated due to the project activity, due to the project phase. Then on the basis of the identification of the environmental impact, we can evaluate the impacts. Either they are the significant or not. We have to evaluate the impacts as well. And then on the basis of the nature of the environmental impacts and on the basis of the significance of the environmental impact, we have to propose some mitigation measures so that the environmental impact cannot be as significant. Because if the project or the environmental impact is significant, it cannot be proposed or it cannot be further move forward. Therefore, we have to just propose some mitigation measures as well so that the residual impact can be less. So these are the flow chart that describe that start from the screening, then the scoping study, then the EIA, and on the basis of the baseline profile, we have to predict some environmental impacts. And on the basis of the environmental impacts, we have to evaluate the impact, and on the basis of the identification and evaluation, we have to propose some mitigation measures. So far, is there any question? So you can raise.
Okay. So so we have been responding to many questions. So one of the questions is, can you elaborate the meaning of baseline studies? What do you mean by baseline studies?
Yeah, there are basically different kinds of the baseline studies. For example, air quality, ambient air quality. There is a noise level monitoring. There is a soil sampling and analysis. There is a groundwater and groundwater sampling and analysis. These are the main basic four. But on the basis and on the nature of the project, there are the different baseline data requirement as well. For example, as I mentioned in the previous slide, on the basis of the project, on the nature of the project, we need to conduct the social baseline data as well. And if the project is very near to the marine, then we have to conduct the marine survey. In the marine survey, there are the different kinds of the studies that involved. We have to collect the marine water, we have to collect the marine sediments, then we have to conduct the bathymetric surveys. And in the same way, if the project is very near to the protected area, for example, near to the forest, near to any protected area, then we need to conduct terrestrial survey as well. But as I mentioned before, ambient air quality, noise level monitoring, and collection of the soil, and the collection and the analysis of the groundwater, these are the main four baseline criteria. But we have to conduct social impact assessment, we have to collect the socio-economic data, we have to collect the marine data as well on the base on the nature of the project, and in the same way we have to collect the terrestrial survey as well. We have to conduct the terrestrial survey as well. So I hope it is clear now.
Yes. Next question. What could be the implication of not carrying out the EIA study at the initial stage of a project?
There are the two basically implications. One is the legal implication, as I mentioned in my legal and the framework section, that every territory, every country, they have their own standard to carry out environmental impact assessment at particular stage. So if a project proponent, if they do not carry out environmental impact assessment at particular stage as per prescribed in the environmental standard, then there is a legal implication. Then the second implication that I mentioned before as well, that if the project has a significant environmental impact assessment and we do not carry out environmental impact assessment at the earliest possible stage, then there is a chances that we lose to put some design control so that the environmental impact cannot be as significant. At later stages, it can be a your cost, it can give you some cost, it can increase the cost basically, because if you did not put design control at the initial stage to control the environmental impact, then in the later stage, then you have to put some more cost to control the environmental impact assessment. So there are the two implications. One is the legal, and the second one with respect to the finance and with respect to the project as well.
Thanks, Fazan. Gayatri, do you have anything to add to that? Gayatri, can you hear us?
Yep. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Gayatri. Good afternoon. So we have received some questions regarding what if we didn't conduct the EIA in field stage, and what if we are only conducting in EPC stage. So my colleague have already answered. My colleague Mr. Paisan have already answered. So just to stress the point, the major benefit is if we are doing it at the earliest stage, we will be identifying the impacts at the earliest stage, and we can implement some control measures or mitigation measures at the design level, so that this will be cost effective. And also we have received some questions regarding whether this is a regulatory requirement. Yes, in most of the countries, EIA is a regulatory requirement. All the projects should go through or have to do the EIA process from specific stages. And the requirements will vary from country to country or region to region, or where the project is. So all the international protocols followed by the country, the projects also have to follow those protocols or international standards also. And I just want to add one point regarding the baseline. So baseline is the second step after scoping and screening. We will do the baseline survey. So baseline basically gives you a picture of the project site without the project. So we will consider like there is no project at that site, and then we will measure all the aspects which my colleague already mentioned. So we will measure all the air, water, all the soil quality data. So this will give us a picture, like it will serve as a standard, or we can compare once the project is there, what is the change in the environment or how much it changed. So this is the purpose of baseline. Baseline helps us to compare what is the situation, actual situation now, and what will be the situation once the project is there. So this is the purpose of baseline.
Okay, thanks, Gayatri. There's another question. What is the distinction between screening and scoping?
Yeah, Ms. Kathy, if you want to answer, you can answer. Yeah,
Yeah.
tell me.
So screening basically require basically identify whether an EIA is required or not. So it is the first step. So we have also received another question, same answer for how we will identify there is a quality or quantitative change in the environment. So in the screening, this will be conducted. Like we will first take all the environmental aspects, for example, air, water, or soil, groundwater, and we will check all the project activities, and we will identify whether any of the project activity will be impacting these aspects. So this will be helping us to uh, identify whether there is any quantitative change in the environment, and this step will be the screening. So in screening, okay, I have identified this project will cause a significant impact in air. Okay, and the next step is scoping. So in scoping, so now I understood that after analyzing the initial data, I identified that the project is going to affect environment. So EIA is required. Now I have to identify what all aspects of the environment will I check in detail in the EIA. So scoping is to identify which aspect I'm going to study. Suppose my project is not sharing any marine environment, or not near or not in a vicinity of any marine environment, then I can scope out the marine environment from my study. Okay, and but my project have a significant impact on air. So in the scoping study, I will identify, okay, I have to consider the air. So this air will be further analyzed in a quantitative way in the EIA. And those things which are not related or which are not causing any significant impacts, this will be scoped out from the EIA. So this is the screening and scoping. Screening will identify whether a EIA is required, and scoping will identify which aspect we have to check in detail. I hope I have answered the question.
Yes, and next question. So the person who conducts the EIA, do they need to have any necessary qualifications? Is it a team effort or is it an individual effort?
Yes.
Yes, yes, exactly. There should be a competent person who must carry out the environmental impact assessment, because without the experience and the judgment experience and the competency and the background, educational background, a person cannot complete the environmental impact assessment. They cannot identify fully environmental impacts as well, and they cannot evaluate the impact as well. So the person whom are carrying out the environmental impact assessment, they are fully experienced, they have fully background knowledge, so that they can conduct environmental impact assessment in a detailed and the comprehensive manner.
Thank you. Kazan, let's continue presentation.
So far we have discussed environmental impact assessment process and the components. So we were discussing about the flow chart, that starting from the screening, scoping, EIA, predict impacts, evaluate impacts, mitigation, and the enhancement and the residual impacts. And Ms. Gayatri, my colleague, she already explained as well what is the screening and the scoping. And now we are going to describe further as well. Now, what is the screening and what is the scoping? Now we are going to describe in a detail as well. As my colleague also mentioned, that the screening is a process of deciding whether or not a project is likely to have the significant environmental impact, and therefore whether or not an EIA is required. So as my colleague also mentioned, that screening is deciding either we require environmental impact assessment or not, or it also decide either the project have a significant environmental impact on the environment or not. So screening is the first step to decide either the project has a significant environmental impact or not, yes or not. And if it is a significant environmental impact, then either we need environmental impact assessment or not. So a screening study involves conducting a preliminary review of the project, identify the sensitivities of the site and surrounding land uses, considering the environmental release to air, water, and land, and making a judgment on whether or not any significant impacts are likely to arise. It is the same case as we described, that either we have to check either the project activities or the project itself is releasing any air emission, any other emission, any discharges to the environment, and they have the significant impact on the environment, then we have to conduct the environmental impact assessment in a detail. The next step is the preliminary scoping report. Preliminary scoping report is basically identifying the issue that what we have to include in a detailed assessment. It is the same thing that my colleague already explained, that what we have to include in the detailed assessment. As she also mentioned, that if the project is very far away from the marine, then we have to scope out the marine survey. If the project is very away from the social community or the community, then we have to just scope out the community assessment as well. If the project is away, or if the project is in an industrial area, then there are some of the component that can be scoped out as well. So the preliminary scoping study define basically the scope of the environmental impact assessment. And in some regions, in some countries, it is also called a terms of the references. Then there is the final scoping report as well. There are the different techniques that are available, that can be used, that can be available in different region to just find out the to just make the final scoping report. The first point is that is a checklist. There are the different kinds of a checklist in the regulation as well, in the client side as well, or even an experienced environmental scientist, environmental engineer, or environment person, they can make their own checklist as well, what we have to include in the scoping. Then there are the risk matrices as well, to just evaluate the impacts. For example, as we mentioned before as well, that if the environmental impact, if the project has an environmental impact and if it is a significant, then we have to conduct the environmental impact assessment, or we have to conduct that particular baseline survey as well. So risk matrix help us to just identify the which environmental impact is a significant or which are not significant. Then professional judgment and the brainstorming. If a person is a enough experience, if they have the enough knowledge, and if they have enough conducted the environmental impact assessment, they can also assess, they can also judge what are the environmental impacts, what are the significant environmental impacts, and what are the not a significant environmental impact assessment. And there is a brainstorming meeting as well. There can be a workshop, there can be a team discussion as well. There is a team brainstorming discussion, that which are the environmental impacts are the significant, which are not significant, which we have to conduct the detailed survey, which we have not to conduct the detailed survey. So professional judgment and the brainstorming is also one of the tool to just finalize the scoping report. Then the next and the last point, that is the ENVID. What is ENVID? ENVID is the basically environmental impact identification of workshop. We will discuss these detail as well in the upcoming slides, but these are the four main techniques that are available that we can use to just make the final scoping report. One, starting from the checklist, there is a risk matrices, there is a professional judgment and the brainstorming, and the final, that is the ENVID as well. What is checklist and the matrices? Basically, the checklist and the matrices provide a relatively simple method to identify the potentially significant impacts, but are not able to capture more complex issues, including interaction. As I mentioned before as well, that there are the different methods, and checklist and the matrices also one of the method for the final scoping report. It is a very simple method, and it cannot give us the quantification, and it cannot be give us the exact picture as well, and it cannot be applicable for the complex issues. Then there is another one that we discussed before as well, that is the professional judgment and the brainstorming. Professional judgment and the brainstorming by the experienced environmental scientists and the engineers. As I explained you before as well, that if a person who has enough knowledge, who have enough experience, who have the enough background knowledge, they can only conduct the scoping and the environmental impact assessment. And they have the enough professional experience, and they can judge what are the environmental impacts significant and what are environmental impacts are not as significant. So on the basis of the experience, and on the basis of the knowledge, and on the basis of the brainstorming, discussion, team meetings, they can identify which are the environmental impacts are the significant and which are not significant. And the next point, that is the ENVID workshop, or the ENVID basically. ENVID is basically a exercise or the workshop, and it is a brainstorm meeting and the discussion of the professional of the different discipline. It can be environmental engineers, it can be a process engineers, it can be a design engineers, it can be HSE engineers. It is a discussion, it is a workshop in which all the discipline engineers can sit and then they can review the project description, and then they can identify which are the environmental impacts are the potentially significant and which are not as potential significant. Basically, as I mentioned, that it is a workshop and it must be chaired by the experienced environmental scientist or the environmental consultant or environmental professional. Okay, and they should have the enough knowledge about the process, what is the process and what is the process impact can be on the environment. And there are the different methodology of the conducting the workshop. There is a different guide words that can be used to identify and that can be used in the ENVID workshop. For example, there is an environmental aspect group, that is the air emission. Air emission, there are the different kinds of the air emission. For example, stack emission, vent emission, fugitive emissions. In the same way, there is an environmental aspect group, that is the liquid discharges. There is an environmental aspect group, that is the waste disposal. There can be a guide word, or there can be an aspect group, that is a resource consumption. There is a guide word, that is a ecology. There is a guide word, that is a physical interaction. In the physical interaction, there is a noise level. There is a artificial lighting. There is a guide word, that is the use of the restricted substances. Either that particular project is using any restricted substances, for example, ozone depleting substances, for example, radioactive substances. Then there is a other, there can be a guide word, that is a socio-economic guide word. So these are the different guide words which can be used in the ENVID workshop for the brainstorming discussion, so that we can identify which are the significant, which are the potential significant environmental impact and which are not a significant environmental impact as well. And this is the template that we discussed in the ENVID. This is a template normally we used in the ENVID workshop. You can see that there is a guide word, that is the air emission. There is a guide word, liquid discharges. In the same way, there is a guide word for the socio-economic. There is a guide word for the waste management. There is a guide word for use of the restricted substances. There is a guide word for the user for the physical interaction. So with the help of these guide words, we can identify which are the environmental impacts are the significant and which are not as significant. You can see in the air emission, we identify different activities. For example, vehicular movement. There are the two aspects which can be raised due to the vehicular movement. One is the engine exhaust emissions, and the second one is the dust emission. In dust emission, there are the different kinds of the particles. For example, particulate matter 10, PM10. There is a TSP, total suspended particulate. There is a particulate matter 5. There is a particulate matter 2.5. So basically, there are the different particulate matters which can be generated due to the vehicular movement, and there is a emission from the vehicle engines as well. The impact can be a air pollution. It can be a increased level of the particulate matter in the ambient air. The consequences can be a generation of the pollutant gases, including oxides of sulfur, oxides of nitrogen, carbon monoxide, and GHG, greenhouse gases. And then we have to identify either is there any community concern or the reputational risk. If the project is very near, if the project is very near to the community, then there might be a chance that this project is a community concern. The community can raise the concern, because if the vehicular movement are more, then there is a more pollution. So they can raise the question, they can raise the project, and it can be a community concern. And if the values of the emission from the vehicle exceeding the limit, if the values from the vehicle exceeding the limit, then it might be a reputational risk as well, because every company have their own reputation. They have their own policy that they must comply with the environmental laws, and if the values will exceed from the prescribed limit, from the standard limit, then there might be a reputational risk as well. So we have to identify both perspective. Either there might be a community concern, or there might be a only a reputational risk, or there is a chances, there is both chances that there might be a community or both the reputational risk as well. Then we have to identify the preventive and the control measures that are already in place. For example, if I talk about the same activity that we discussed, vehicular movement. So there is a control measure, that is a vehicle maintenance. If the vehicle is maintained properly, there is a very less chances that they emit a more pollutant. If there is a proper testing of the engine, there is a very less chances that the emission will exceed from the prescribed limit. And if the roads are the paved, if the vehicle will move on the unpaved road, there is a highly chances of the generation of the particulate matter. But if the roads will be paved, then there will be very minimal chances to increase for the increased particulate matter. Then we have to just identify some monitoring measures. What are the monitoring measures that are in place? Either we are conducting any testing, either we are conducting any monitoring to control the emissions. So we have to just identify monitoring measures as well. And then we have to identify the significance of the impact. This significant is on the basis of the brainstorming discussion. There is a different matrices which we explained before as well, that on the basis of the severity, from starting from 1 to 6, starting from 1 to 4, there are the different matrices that are available in each region, that are available in each country. And on that matrix, on the basis of that matrix, we can just highlight the significance of the impact after the mitigation measure. And if it is the risk is a significant, then we have to propose some recommendations. But if the risk is not a significant, then it can be not a mandatory to propose some recommendation. Okay, so in these brainstorming discussion, in this ENVID workshop, we can identify what are the significant environmental impacts and what are not a significant environmental impact assessment. Then there is a final scoping. These are the basically the contents of the final scoping report. We already discussed in detail what are the scoping report, and these are the basically the content of the environmental impact assessment. First of all, we have to outline the description of the project. What are the project? Either it's a development project, infrastructure project, or it's an industrial project. We have to just mention all the details of the project. Then we have to just mention existing environmental feature of the area. And my colleague already explained why we need the environmental baseline data, to just mention what is the current condition. What is the current condition before executing the project. Then we have to mention the existing environmental feature of the area. Then we have to just mention the environmental issues and the significant impacts. Then we have to identify those environmental issues to be included in the scope of the EIA. And then we have to identify what we are going to be scoped out. As we mentioned before as well, that on the basis and on the nature of the data, on the environmental, on the project, there are the some baseline surveys that we can scope out. For example, if the project is very away from the marine, then we can scope out the marine. If the project is very away from the community, then we can scope out the socio-economic perspective. These are the issues that we can scope out in the detailed EIA. And then brief statement on the proposed methodology for the study. Then we have to just identify and we have to mention what we are going, methodology we are going to use in the detailed environmental impact assessment. So these are the minimum 6 points that we must include in the scoping report. The first is basically the project description. Either it's a development project or industrial project. Then existing environmental features. Then what are the significant environmental issues? And then what are those environmental issues that we need to include in the environmental impact assessment? And what are not a significant environmental issues when we have to scope out from the environmental impact assessment. And then the last point, we have to just describe the methodology that we will use in the environmental impact assessment. Now there was some question before that we already addressed as well, that regarding the environmental baseline. What is the environmental baseline as well? Sorry. Basically, as we explained before as well, there are the different features, there are the different components that we need to monitor, and that condition and that survey is called environmental baseline. For example, ambient air quality, soil sampling and analysis, noise monitoring, groundwater sampling and analysis, and on the nature of the project, marine survey, that the terrestrial survey, and the socio-economic survey as well. So the EIA should include the detailed evaluation of the baseline condition of the project and its surrounding. We have to just, there are the different, basically there are the different criteria at which stages or at which level we have to conduct the environmental baseline survey. In some guidelines, in some regulation, there is a, we have to cover 2 kilometer square area. In some guidelines we have to cover 5. It depends, we have to cover at least minimum 2 to 5 kilometer square area, either for the baseline, for the environmental baseline conditions. Then the impact assessment and the significance. Basically, as we mentioned before, there are the different criteria, different methodologies that we can use for the impact assessment and to identify the significance of the environmental impact. 4 types of environmental risks need to be considered. One is the one of impact associated with the activities such as civil engineering. Then there is the routine impact associated with the planned normal operations, and then non-routine impacts such as those arising from process trips, emergency scenarios, accidental, and there are the some impact that is a historical impact due to the past activities. Now we will explain and we will describe what are the planned environmental impact. Planned environmental impact are those that are the normal routine operation, that are the normal routine activity, that is a normal routine operations, that is a normal project activities. For example, building project, it is a normal routine planned environmental impact. Operating facility, for example, emissions to atmosphere through combustion of the or venting, it is a normal routine operation. If the project facility and the project has the generator at the side, and to provide the electricity we have to operate the generator, and definitely they will emit the emission to the air. It is a normal and the planned environmental impact assessment because it is a planned activity. Then there is an accidental environmental impact, which is arises due to the unseen circumstances, due to the mishap, due to the accident. For example, loss of the containment, for example, leakages, spill. These all are the accidental environmental impacts. Then what is the significant environmental impact? The significance of the planned and the accidental environmental impact depends on a number of factors, which are impact magnitude, the severity, then impact duration, then the reversibility, the impact interaction, whether the impact is positive or the negative, and then the sensitivity of the receiving environment. As we mentioned that in the template, I have shown to you during the ENVID that we have to just identify the significance of the environmental impact. There are the different ranking which can be used for ranking of the significance of the environmental impact assessment. I will show you the one of the matrix. It is the basically environmental impact severity matrix. Environmental impact severity matrix. We called it environmental impact severity matrix. The left side, starting from 1 to 6, it defines the severity of the impact. It's starting from the slight, it goes to the disastrous. It can be the slight, it can be the notable, it can be the minor, it can be a moderate, it can be a massive, and it can be a disastrous. And from the upper side, there is the impact duration. Starting from the momentary, which is a less than 1 week, then the short term 1 year, less than 1 year, then the medium term 1 to 5 years, then the long term 5 to 10 years, then the long term 10 to 30 years, and then the long term, which is the more than the 30 years. And if you can see, we have to rank either, for example, if the project having the environmental impact and it is only the minor, it is only the slight, then we can select the one. And if we feel that it is only the momentary, then impact will only be the momentary, it can only be a less than 1 week, then we can select 1A. And if we feel that the environmental impact, which is their severity is very high, then we can select the moderate, we can select the massive. And if we feel that their impact duration can be also a long term, for example 5 to 10 years, then it can be a 4D. And if come under the 4D, it's mean it is a disastrous, it is a massive environmental impact. Then we have to just put an additional control measure so that the residual impact can be the less, the significance of the environmental impact can be less. Then I'm going to explain what is the major accidental environmental impact. Accidental environmental impact are those caused by the accidental releases that has the potential to lead to the disastrous, catastrophic, major, or the serious. Previously we only defined the accidental environmental impact, but here we are defining what is a major accidental environmental impact, which is basically lead to the disastrous, which lead to the catastrophic, the major, or the serious consequences to the environment. And with respect to the accidental environmental impact, we have to just choose, or we have to just use another matrix. We called it as an environmental risk potential matrix. There is another separate matrix which we normally use for the accidental. Here we have to just define or differentiate between the planned and the unplanned. I will explain you again that the planned are those which arises due to the normal or the routine operations, and the unplanned are those which are arises due to the unforeseen circumstances, accidental, like spillages, loss of the containment, leakages. All are the accidental environmental impact assessment. The previous slide I explained you the matrix that is used for the planned environmental impact assessment, and for the accidental environmental impact we have to use the risk matrix, which I'm going to share you now. This is the matrix that we normally use for the unplanned environmental impact. Here again it is the same scenario. Starting from 1 to 6 there is a severity, and then there is a duration as well, the likelihood as well, starting from the rare, unlikely, possible, likely, very likely, and almost certain. So these are the likelihood of the impact. Now I'm going to explain basically the component or the normal report structure of the environmental impact assessment. This is the normal environmental impact structure. Starting from the chapter 1, which is an executive summary. In executive summary we have to little bit explain about the project description, then we have to give the summary of the findings. Then the next chapter, that is the introduction, again it is a brief summary of the project. Then we have to mention the project title and the project proponent, who is proposing the project. We have to mention the details. Then who is conducting the environmental impact assessment, we have to put environmental impact assessment consultant detail. Then the project description and the rationale and the justification and the chronology for the determination of the environmental impact assessment. Then the next section is the legal framework. What are the legal requirement, the legal standard that apply to that particular project? There are some standards, there are some legal framework which are not applicable to that particular project, then we don't need to mention. But if all the standards and the framework that are applies to that particular project, we need to mention in section 3. Then chapter 4, the section 4, again it will be the detailed description of the project, statement of the need, project location, project activities, status, schedule, everything. Then the section 5, that is the detailed section, that is the environment, impact, mitigation, and the monitoring measure. In this section we have to identify, we have to conduct the baseline survey which fall under the environmental section. Then we have to identify, we have to evaluate the impacts, and then we have to mitigate the environmental impacts, and we have to propose some monitoring measures as well. Here you can see there are the few baseline requirement that is mentioned, the minimum requirement, starting from the air quality and GHG emission, then the marine water, then the waste management, then the geology, seismicity, soil and the groundwater, then the marine ecology, terrestrial ecology, noise, traffic, socio-economic, social, cultural and archaeological, and then impact on the climate change. So these are the minimum things that we need to cover with respect to the baseline and with respect to the impact evaluation, mitigation measures, and the monitoring. And then we have to just assess the risk assessment as well. We have to carry out the risk assessment as well, which I mentioned before as well, that all those unplanned environmental impacts which arise due to the unplanned activities, we have to carry out the risk assessment as well. Then we have to propose some management framework, which include environmental management program, objectives, roles. We have to define some roles and responsibilities. We have to just propose some training and the competency. We have to mention some communication protocols. We have to mention some monitoring and the reporting tools and the requirement. And then we have to mention some audit and the inspection tools and the requirement. And the last section, that is the project alternatives. We have to some discussion on the project alternatives as well. For example, if we just change the locations, if we just change the technology of the project activity, we have to just identify the project alternatives as well. And then the last section, that is a statement of the commitment, that the project proponent have to give some commitment that they will comply with all the applicable standard, and they will comply with all the monitoring requirement that is mentioned in environmental impact assessment. This is the project alternative. I explained already before as well that we have to mention some alternatives as well on the basis of the, for example, the project location. Let's suppose if we change the project location, there might be chances that the environmental impact, the significance of the environmental impact can be less. If we use the better technology, or the alternate technology, then we have to consider in the project alternatives. Then the environmental management framework. In the EMF, we have to mention some roles and responsibilities. We have to mention some criteria. For example, if we talk about the objectives, we have to define how environmental control measures will be effectively implemented. We have to define, we have to mention, we have to fix some roles and responsibilities. We have to mention effectiveness. We have to monitor some effectiveness of the mitigation implemented. Then we have to mention some protocols for inspection and the audits. And then we have to identify the training needs and the management requirement to comply with the monitoring requirements. So is there any questions so far you can raise? Then we will start the case study for the environmental impact assessment.
Okay. Yeah, many questions are being raised, but we have been answering them as you've been presenting. One question is, what is the impact of this present pandemic in conducting this EIA study? What differences are coming, and like how are you able to successfully conduct this study now, keeping in mind all these different restrictions and everything?
There are the different scenarios nowadays. Nowadays we are going into a very tough time, that is a COVID-19. But again, due to the restrictions, we have to cover as much possible. We have to cover. We cannot avoid anything. We have to cover maximum aspects, and it can be different components, environmental baselines component, all the things we have to cover. Although in current circumstances it will be very difficult, but again, if we will not identify all the components, all the environmental impact assessment, the EIA cannot be complete.
Now somebody is asking about the regulations and the environmental laws as they vary from country to country, but is there any international code or protocol that is common to all?
Yes, basically, as we mentioned that environmental legal framework and the codes that are vary from country to country, but there are some agreements that are signed by international agencies. There are some guidelines. There are some agreements which are signed by countries. For example, there are the IFC guidelines. There are some WHO guidelines. There are the different protocols. For example, Montreal Agreement Protocol. There are some CFC control protocols. So there are the different protocols that are already in place in different regions, different countries, And I have mentioned that IFC is one of the guideline as well with respect to environment, with respect to health and safety as well.
ISO also be a guideline?
Yeah, ISO, it is also mentioned environmental impact environmental management system, ISO 14001, 14,000 series. It is also mentioned to prevent the environmental impact, to prevent the environment from the damaging.
Okay, another question is, yes, Gayatri.
Yeah, we have received one question. What is the difference between hazard identification and baseline? Actually, these two are two steps of EIA. In hazard identification, this will be the first step. We have already seen different methods which are used for the hazard identification. In very detail, we have seen ENVID, which is one of the, it's not basically hazard identification, it will be impacts identification. And there are other techniques like metrics can be used, checklist can be used for the impact identification. And baseline is basically surveys collecting the current environmental situation, the surveys to collect the current or existing environmental situation without the project. So this is the basic difference between impact identification and baseline. Then there was another question. Can you please confirm we should also conduct the meteorological parameters in baseline? Yes, because the air quality or the impacts to the air basically depends upon the meteorological parameters. So climate, meteorology, and the air conditions will be studied as a part of air quality or air quality baseline studies. Then another question, if a EIA report is available for one project in the feed stage and other of the similar design project is coming in the same location, does EIA is required to be carried out for a new project? Yes, the EIA is specific for the project. Even if the similar design, it should be conducted for the particular project. And we have received some common questions regarding for which project EIA is required. So as we have discussed before, all the countries or the region will have their own EIA regulations. So this will be varying depending upon the country, or it will be decided upon a country to country basis or region to region basis. So most of the EIA regulations will categorize the project into different categories based upon the size of the project or the impacts. So it can be category A, B, or category 1, 2, 3. So some the projects which are small scale will have a rapid EIA or a small scale EIA only. And those projects which are expected to have more impacts, this will require a detailed EIA or a environmental impact statement or the detailed EIA study. So this will be again based upon the region where the project is located. Which all projects are excluded from the requirements. So this will be varying upon the regulatory requirements. Yes.
So another question, common question we're receiving is how often does this EIA need to be carried out, and how, like, what's the validity period of the baseline studies?
Normally, as we mentioned that the EIA is required, it should be carried out at the earliest possible stage of the project, and there is no assessed validity of the EIA. Normally it's basically on the basis of the submission and the approval of the environmental impact assessment. Normally the project proponent get the environmental permit or the environmental clearance or some NOCs. So there is some validity of the NOC, and then later if the authority is request for another study, then that can be possible. But for the environmental impact assessment, it can be carried at the early possible stage, and as such there is no defined validity of the baseline survey. But the normal we should not use the environmental baseline data older than the 5 years. The best practice is to conduct the latest baseline data again. But if the data is available and it is not older than the 5 years, that can also be used. But again, as we mentioned, the best practice is to conduct a fresh data as much as possible.
Okay.
As Mr. Faizan said, normally the EIA have to conduct at the early stage, and when there is a significant modification in the project, we should
I think there's some sound issue, Gayatri.
So, but what Ms. Gayatri was trying to say is that we mentioned in the slide as well that that is a brownfield and the modification. If the project is going to be under the modification or any expansion, then again environmental impact assessment will be required. So it is the same thing we mentioned in our previous slides as well, that if there is any expansion, if there is any modification, then again, if we feel that there is a significant environmental impact, then we need to carry out environmental impact assessment again.
Exactly. And
Okay.
as a good industrial practice, normally a 5 years HSC integrity audits will be conducted where all the health, safety, and environmental elements will be checked for its compliance to have the HSC integrity, or whether it is ensuring to ensure the HSC integrity. So once in the audit, if there is a gap identified for the environmental elements, then EIA is required. So this is the normal practice, or we can say best industrial practice.
Okay. A few people are also asking about ENVID. If you can also clarify what it stands for. I think it stands for Environmental Impact Identification. But
Yes.
what's the main purpose, and at what stage is it carried out?
So ENVID is the first step, or the after the scoping, we have to identify, or it can be a part of the scoping report. It basically stands for environmental impacts identification. So it will be a brainstorming. It will be a team activity. In experts from the who are related to the facility, they will brainstorm They will first identify the environmental impacts and the environmental aspects, and then they will it's a qualitative risk assessment. So they will qualitatively assess whether the environmental impact is significant, or it is a non-significant impact assessment. So this will give the basis of EIA. So once you have the ENVID, you will identify all the environmental expected environmental impacts. It can be both planned and unplanned. And in the session, all the identified risks will be ranked based upon the metrics which is applicable to the particular industry or particular region. And those impacts, for those impacts which have a significant environmental impact, there can be some recommendations which can be implemented to reduce the risk further. And those risks which we identify to be significant, okay, in the ENVID, which will be analyzed in detail in EIA, and this will be quantitatively analyzed in EIA. So ENVID serves as the basis of EIA studies.
Okay. Next question is there any public participation in EIA?
Yeah. This also,
Yes, answer will get.
yeah. So this also depends upon the regulatory requirement. Some countries require the public participation. They have specific stipulations how to conduct the public participation, and the public opinion have to be incorporated in the EIA report also. But this for strategic projects, or for those projects which are government projects, for such certain exemptions are there. For those strategic projects, the public consultation is exempted.
Yeah, in addition to what Ms. Gayatri explained, as you mentioned that there are some circumstances, it's vary from region to region as well. Public consultation we also need to conduct during the environmental impact assessment, and in some countries there is also the regulation for the public hearing as well. Even after the submission, even after the submission of the environmental impact assessment to the regulatory authority, we need to conduct the public hearing, and we need to call, and we need to give the advertisement in the publicly, so that all the stakeholders can can come, and they can participate in the project approval phase. So there are the two kinds of the public consultation: one during the execution, or during the preparation or the conducting the environmental impact assessment, and the one stage is after conducting the environmental impact assessment. There is the public hearing, in which we have to call, and we have to give some advertisement publicly, so that all the stakeholders can come and they can present their concern, and their concern can be resolved and final approval can be obtained.
Okay, thank you. I think we have already addressed this before. People are asking, is there any like expiry of EIA? Like if you've done it after 5 years, should we do it again? Or is it valid until any significant modification is done?
We already explained that as such there is no validity of the environmental impact assessment. As we explained before as well, normally after submission of the environmental impact assessment, the approving authority or the regulatory authority, they give some NOCs, environmental permits, environmental clearance, and that environmental permit, that environmental clearance is valid for the 1 year. And after the 1 year, depending upon the nature, depending upon the operation activities, regulatory authority might ask any study that they require, that they feel to be conducted again. This is the one scenario. And if the project undergo any modification, any expansion in any stage of the any year, maybe 1 year, 2 year, then we need to carry out environmental impact assessment again.
Okay, I think we're good. Let's proceed further.
Okay, thank you all of you for your questions, and I hope we are answering all of your questions. Now we are going to start the case study. That it is one of our study that we carried out for one of our project, that is the environmental impact assessment for sulfur recovery unit. Basically, now I will give you the project facility overview. What was the facility? The facility was to convert the hydrogen sulfide from the acid gas feed stream to elemental sulfur and oxidize the remaining sulfur compound to sulfur dioxide and less than 0.5 ppmv H2S prior to the discharge to the atmosphere. Then ammonia destruction is to achieve less than 30 ppmv of NH3 in the gas stream existing the condenser. The facility will be operating with the higher recovery of sulfur, that is a 99.9, complying with the stringent atmospheric SO2 emission limit. It is one of the, we can say that environmental friendly project, that is a sulfur recovery unit, so that the emission due to the sulfur emission can be less. This is basically the project location, project map. You can see it is their location. What we did and what we carried out during the execution of this project, basically, I will show you in the flow chart. First of all, we carried out the kickoff meeting, then we carried out data collection and data review. What kind of data we basically collected in this environmental impact assessment? We collected the process description basically, and we collected their PNIDs, PFDs, and all the relevant their company HSE documents we collected, and we reviewed that all the documents. And on the basis of the data collection, we conducted the ENVID workshop. ENVID workshop, we explained before as well that what is the ENVID workshop. I will explain here again so that there should be a continuity of this case study to understand the case study. The ENVID workshop is again the environmental impact identification workshop, and it is normally chaired by experienced environmental scientists, environmental consultant, environmental engineer who have the enough knowledge, and it must be participated by different discipline engineers, for example the process engineers, HSE engineers, design engineers, construction engineers, resident engineers, all the discipline which are applicable on that particular project, they must be participated in the ENVID workshop. And as my colleague already explained, that it is a qualitative assessment of the risk associated with the environment due to the project activities. And on the basis of the ENVID workshop, it will be easy to identify which are the most potential significant environmental impact assessment that we need to focus in the environmental impact assessment. Then we carried out the scoping study. Scoping study, again, it is we already explained before as well that it is a study which define what we have to include in the environmental impact assessment and what we don't need to include in the environmental impact assessment. As we given the example before as well that, for example, if the project is fall away from the marine, then we can scope out marine surveys, baseline surveys, and if the project is fall away from the community, then we can just scope out socioeconomic surveys. And if the project is uh, away from the as such marine or terrestrial survey, the protected area, then we scope out the terrestrial survey or the other ecological survey as well. So the scoping study defined what we have to include in the environmental impact assessment and what we can scope out in the environmental impact assessment. And then in the environmental impact assessment, these are the basically the section that we explained before as well. That is the introduction, legal framework, environmental impact and the mitigation measures. Then we have to consider some project alternatives and the statement of the fitness. It is the same sections that we explained in the structure of the environmental impact assessment report. The project deliverables, these are the basically the project deliverables that we deliver during the environmental impact assessment. The first is the environmental baseline survey report. We carry out different environmental surveys. For example, ambient air quality, noise level monitoring we carried out, and the data is shared with respect to the soil sampling and analysis and with respect to the groundwater. Then we carried out the noise assessment study. Then we carried out the pollution prevention control report, and then the construction management plan as well. So these were the project deliverables with respect to the environmental impact assessment as well. Now I will explain the one by one the detail of the air quality, what were the environmental impact, what were the baseline conditions, and how we evaluate the environmental impacts and how we propose some mitigation measures. Basically, the environmental air pollution can cause significant effect on the environment and it primarily affect the respiratory. These are the some conditions and these are the some causes due to the air pollution. It can be a significant and it can damage the environment. It can be health. It can raise the health issues as well. Because there are the different criteria pollutants, for example, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, particulate matter. These are the criteria pollutants which can not only impact the environment, although it can also affect the health as well. Basically, there was some question as well, I think, with respect to the climate as well for the base under the baseline survey. Yes, under the air quality, we have to consider some climate as well. What are the wind direction? We have to cover what are the wind direction, what is the wind speed. Okay, so these are what are the temperature. Okay, what is the frequency of the rain. Okay, and what is the months in which we can expect the more rain. What is the winter season? What is the summer season? We have to consider all under the climate, under the air quality as well. Then we have to assess humidity. Sorry, we have to assess the humidity as well. That throughout the years, in this project, the relative humidity is high throughout the year, which is averaging about 70 and reaching about 95 and or more in early mornings. And the temperature that was observed. That was the maximum temperature vary from 12.4 in March to a peak 44.6 in July and August. So these are the maximum temperature that we observed. That is at 12.4 in March and 44.6 in July and August. And the average rainfall of this of the region of this project is the 88 mm, which occurs as the series of the discrete event through the November to April. The average rainfall that we considered and we observed, that is the 88. And with respect to the wind, the prevailing wind condition is from north and northwest. this wind direction is very important to assess the air quality, because if the wind direction define the dispersion of the air pollutants, because if the it define the dispersion, how the dispersion of the air pollutants around or the surrounding the project. So this is the basically the wind rows that we collected. A dominant northwesterly wind component is clearly observable in the wind rows. We can see that the direction of the wind, which is the northwesterly, and this is the data basically that we used and that we collected for the facility. You can see there is a minimum hourly, maximum hourly, exceed minimum 8 hourly, maximum 8 hourly, exceed 8 hourly, minimum daily, maximum daily, exceed daily, monthly, and the actual capture. And then it is on the monthly basis. In the month of January, in the month of February, what we have monitored, you can see oxides of sulfur, oxides of nitrogen, NO2, particulate matter 10, ozone, carbon monoxide, and H2S. These are the pollutants that we collected during the collection of the baseline for the ambient air quality. And then you can see there is a minimum hourly, then the maximum hourly, then there is the exceed hourly, minimum 8 hours, maximum 8 hours. These are the different frequencies, minimum hourly, but in the standard perspective, in the prescribed limit, it varies from region to region. In some region, the criteria pollutant must be monitored for 8 hours, some pollutants measurement for 24 hours, some criteria pollutant measurement is for 1 year as well. So it varies from region to region and from country to country as well. But in this study, we considered minimum hourly, maximum hourly, exceed, minimum 8 hourly, maximum 8 hourly, exceed 8 hours, minimum daily, maximum daily, and exceedance daily as well. But for the month of January and February. Then we carried out air dispersion modeling for the estimation of the maximum ground level concentration of the pollutant discharged from the stacks. In this project, there are the different stacks basically, and to just assess the maximum ground level concentration, we carried out the air dispersion modeling. You can see modeling input data operation. We used stack height, we used stack diameter, velocity, temperature, we use some meteorological data, and then we use some other data as well. For example, emission rate, we use emission rate for sulfur dioxide, emission rate for sulfur oxides of nitrogen, nitrogen oxides. Then we use emission rate for carbon monoxide. Then we use emission rate for carbon hydrogen sulfide as well. These are the different inputs that we used in air dispersion modeling. And we have used basically the software that we use, that is the AirMod, Breeze AirMod software we used. That is the US EPA's approved software, and we use for the air dispersion modeling. The emission source incinerator was modeled with design data for comparison with the air quality standards. And then you can see basically, then you can see the modeled maximum concentration. NO2 for averaging period for 1 hour and a 24 hour, we got 1.32 microgram per meter cube. For 24 hour, we got 0.37. In the same way, SO2 for 1 hour 3.64, 24 hour 1.01, annual 0.24. In the same way, CO we got 0.012 milligram per meter cube, 8 hours 0.0068 milligram per meter cube. H2S we got for 1 hour 0.11, and for H2 for 24 hours we got 0.03. These are basically the contours that we got after the air dispersion modeling. There are you can see basically the source of the emission of the pollutant as well, and then accordingly on the basis of the air climate, on the basis of the wind direction, on the basis of the wind speed, okay, on the basis of the stack height. These are the dispersion of the air pollutants. Then we carried out the basically the impact assessment. We explained before as well that after the mentioning the current baseline conditions, we have to evaluate the impact assessment. We have to do the environmental impact assessment. So we carried out basically the cumulative impact assessment, and the cumulative results allow an indication of the whether or not the long-term ambient air quality are likely to be exceed. No significant cumulative impact have been identified. So on the basis of the result of the ambient air quality and on the basis of the result of the air dispersion modeling, we concluded that there were no significant cumulative impact have been identified. Then environmental impact prediction and evaluation during the construction. Atmospheric emission likely to occur during the construction phase. Basically in the construction phase, there are the uses of the vehicular movement, there are the uses of the heavy equipment and the machinery. So there is a chances of the dust emission, there is a chances of the fugitive dust emissions during the construction phase. Then during the operation phase, it is likely that the atmospheric emissions and the air quality impacts may occur during the operation phase of the proposed project. The few gases will be emitted from the heaters, boilers. Fugitive, there are the three basically the chances. One is the emission from the boilers, heaters, and the flares, and then the fugitive emissions will also be emitted from the flanges, valves, pumps, and the compressors. And there is a chances of that during operation of the facility, there is a possibility of H2S, SO2, NO2, and carbon monoxide from the incinerator stack. Then if we see the cumulative impact, particulate matter tank and the vehicular emission may increase if any industry do establish in the vicinity of the project. Therefore, the cumulative impact are expected to be less. Then on the basis of the impact assessment, we propose some mitigation measures, which are the potential mitigation. For example, unleaded petrol must be used to avoid the emissions from the vehicle. If the fuel of the vehicle is of a good quality, then there is a very less chances of the emission. Then we have proposed some mitigation measures with respect to the equipment. Vehicle emissions shall be kept to a minimum by eliminating engine idling time. Then conducting regular maintenance. If the equipment and the vehicle is maintained regularly and if the maintenance is properly, then there is a very less chances of the emission. Then the provision of the VOC filters as the exhaust and the proper PPE for the VC will be provided to the workers. Then we propose that the LDR program should be implemented and launched. And then we mentioned that the handling of the process chemical standard practices. There are some selected mitigation measures as well. That the stack height should be higher than the roof height of the nearby structure to avoid in air dispersion of the gases pollutant. There are the particular standard. Normally in every country. But if we see, and if we follow the US EPA method, which is the most reliable, then it is the mandatory that the stack height should be higher than the roof height of the nearby structure, so that the air pollutant can be dispersed properly. Then we propose a selected mitigation measure, that is to ensure effective maintenance and the operational procedure so as to reduce the potential for unnecessary plant operation interruption or upsets. And then we proposed some mitigation measure that the emissions control can only be effective if maintained and serviced regularly. As I mentioned before as well, if the equipment is maintained properly and their maintenance is done effectively, then there is a very less chances of the emissions. And then the speed limit, as we mentioned before as well, that if the road is unpaved and if we will not monitor the speed limit, then there is highly chances of the road accident and the generation of the particulate matter. So that's why we propose that speed limit suitable for the type of the road that will prevent to avoid the accident and the subsequent traffic delays. Then we propose some mitigation measures to address some cumulative impact as well. That is, the cumulative impact can only occur if new industries. In particular project, there were no industries, so that's why we did not consider for the cumulative impact. Then we propose some monitoring program. For example, predictive emission monitoring system should be installed for flue gas monitoring. Continuous emission monitoring system, which we call SAMs, must be in place. The data test for the SAMs and the PEMs must be carried out. The routine checks of the flanges must be carried out to avoid the fugitive emissions. Then H2S detection system and the periodic air quality monitoring should be implemented. Then with respect to the marine ecology, basically this project was very away from the marine ecology. That's why on the basis of the ENVID workshop and on the basis of the document review, we finalized and we anticipated that there is no impact on the marine ecology due to the this project activities.
Okay. So we've been receiving a few questions with regards to the air quality section. Somebody was asking about, like, what is the main purpose of this air dispersion modeling? What software do we use? Why do we carry it out? And like, what are the input and
basically software we require to get the ground level concentration basically, and the software, there are the different kinds of the software, but the software must be approved by the US EPA. We must use the software which are approved as US EPA approved. Okay, and basically why we need to carry the air dispersion modeling to get the cumulative impact assessment, to check the dispersion of the pollutants around the surrounding environment. So the basic purpose to carry out to just check the dispersion of the pollutants, and the software is basically it must be a US EPA approved software.
Okay.
Okay, just to add one point to that one. So we have used air mode software here, and this will basically identify the ground level concentration of the pollutant. So if there is a facility and it emits some few gases to the atmosphere, and how much will be reaching to the ground level. So how much ground level will be analyzed from the software, and this software works on dispersion model. Gaussian dispersion model to be exactly, so we will know, it's a prediction model, so we will know what will be the ground level concentration, and this dispersion will be depending upon many factors which we already explained, the atmospheric parameters, wind, temperature, all these parameters. The concentration will be depending on all these parameters. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so next question is
so we got one question. Can you talk about some construction projects EIA? So we have talked about oil and gas industry in our presentation, but yes, we have done multiple EIAs for the civil construction as well. So it follows the same procedure. So there will be a screening and scoping. An ENVID workshop will identify the environmental impacts, and the environmental risk assessment will be done after that. The only difference will be the regulatory authority. Like for example, for oil and gas sector, the oil and gas company. The question was particularly regarding Abu Dhabi. So we, if it is in Abu Dhabi, oil and gas will be under the ADNOC. So we'll be following the ADNOC standards and requirements. And for other constructions, it depends upon the emirate, where the construction, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, each emirate have their own regulatory requirements. So the EIA will be following, the format will be following as per the authority, but the process will be general.
okay. Then a few people are also asking about this LDAR program. What is the LDAR, and also what is this RATA test? Using some acronyms.
Okay. LDAR is a leak detection and repair program. So this will prevent, or it will include the mitigation measures required for to prevent the leaks which are highly expected in the oil and gas industry. So this is actually a proactive approach to prevent the leak detection, and the reactive approach, like once the leak happens, how to prevent further contamination of land and groundwater.
Okay. Now, another common question is that, like, how do they ensure after the EIA study is done that the regulatory requirements are being taken, they're being taken into account, and like, how do we ensure that those measures are still being in place after the EIA study is done?
There are basically different procedures in each country. If a submission of the environmental impact assessment is done, then the authority will give you some environmental clearance and the environmental permit, which we explained before as well. But again, to check either that those mitigation measures and the programs are implemented or not, there are the different procedures by the each regulatory authority. They normally they asked to provide the quarterly audit reports to be submitted to them on the quarterly basis, and they are also visiting the facilities as well to check the compliance with the mitigation measures and the monitoring programs that was mentioned in the environmental impact assessment. So it is vary, but the normal and the general requirement or the procedure is that they ask you to submit the quarterly reports, or they are used to visit the site as well to check the compliance.
Okay. Next question, is the product or process life cycle assessment also required for EIA?
No. Life cycle assessment is a different approach where we'll analyze the whole process, is the whole life cycle of the process or the product is matching with the, we are quantifying the emissions from throughout the life cycle. Like from, there are multiple approaches from cradle to cradle, like from the initial starting of the project to its recycle, or from gate to gate, where it starts from the immediately after the factory to the consumer. So this is a different approach. LCA is a different approach, and EIA is a different approach. EIA will be identifying the environmental impact, and LCA will only quantifying the emissions. And I just missed one question which you asked before, RATA test. So this is actually for, there are systems, continuous emission monitoring systems, which are installed in the facility. So RATA test is a relative accuracy test audit. So this will be, it's a monitoring whether the system is operating in the defined way.
It's basically the validation of the SEM system. Although the SEMS is working properly, it's a type of the validation of the SEMS.
Yes. Okay. Next question, does the EIA consider the ecosystem services?
Yes, yeah, we already mentioned that there are marine ecology and the terrestrial ecology. It depends on the project. The case study that currently we are presenting, that it is very far away from the marine. That's why there were no impacts anticipated to the project activities. But if the project is near to the marine, then there is a different requirements that must be carried out. For example, marine surveys we need to carry it out, and with respect to the terrestrial ecosystem or terrestrial ecology, we have to carry out the terrestrial survey if it's under the protected area or very near to the forest or other protected area.
And then what is the pre and post environmental monitoring in EIA?
Basically, it depends on the environmental impacts basically, and the monitoring program propose some monitoring requirements on the basis of the environmental impacts.
Okay. I guess let's just continue for now.
Yeah. Okay. So we were discussing about the marine ecology. As we mentioned before as well, that this project is very far away from the marine. Therefore, based on the ENVID workshop and the document review, no impacts are
Hi, sorry, that seems to have a technical issue. Please give us 2 minutes to solve this technical glitch. Thank you. Hi, sorry for the inconvenience. There seems a technical issue with our system, so we are working on it, and we'll resolve it very soon.
Hi guys, can you hear us now?
Yeah, but breaking.
How about now, Gayatri? Is it okay?
Yeah, better. Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, let's continue.
Okay, really apologize all of you. We were discussing about the waste management. In the waste management, we have collected the baseline data baseline data basically from different sources, from client and from the desktop studies as well. With respect to the solid waste and spent catalyst, spent absorber, hazardous solid waste, if any, will be sent for landfill. Poor storage of such waste may result in the leakage.
Okay, 1 minute. I think it's not changing right now. Just give us 1 minute. Okay, try now. Hello, Gayatri, can you hear us?
Yes. It's clear.
Okay. Continue. Let's continue, please.
Yeah.
Okay. With respect to the solid waste solid effluent summary, we have collected the sources, pollution sources, spent catalyst, for example, catalyst for the clause, catalyst for degassing, catalyst for the tail gas hydrogenation, and then we got there basically the quantity, discharge quantity, and then component destination, what is the method of their disposal by vendor, and then their quantity as well. By, for example, if I talk about the catalyst for the degassing, that is a emission mode is intermittent. The discharge quantity is 3 ton. The component basically the activated alumina, and the destination and the collection, the disposal method is basically the by vendor, and minimum 4-year service life, proper disposal, and the recovered by the vendor. These are all the basically the list of the waste that could be generated due to the project activities that we identified during the waste management survey that we carried out during the preparation of the EIA. You can see there is a spent filter element. There is a different under the spent filter element. There are the different further spent filter elements. Then if we talk about wastewater, there is a sour water from acid gas, there is a sour water from gas knockout drum, there is the excess TGCU quench water. So these are the all units from where we were expecting some wastewater, and accordingly their discharge quantity, we also got the discharge quantity and the expected pollutant. For example, in the first one, the sour water from the acid gas, the discharge concentration of the pollutant was only the H2S, which is a 7,000. And then if we talk about the same one, there is also the expectation of the NHE and NH3 pollutant in the in this wastewater, and the destination is routed back to the unit 105 by 1106. So these are the basically the unit numbers of this particular project. And then environmental impact prediction and the evaluation during the construction and the operation. The liquid effluent likely to be generated due to the construction and the operational activities. Sewage, there are the chances of the sewage and the hazardous liquid and the hydrotest water. Then the sanitary sewage, and then there are some hazardous effluents which include paint, thinner from the construction activities and the spillages as well. Then the use of the groundwater. Water was also required for the construction and the operation, and it can impact the level of the groundwater. If the extraction of the groundwater was high, then it can impact the groundwater reservoir as well, if the recharge of the groundwater is not properly. Then the management of the campsite waste, there must be a third-party vendor to collect the wastewater, to collect the waste manage. And then the spill and the leakages. Spill and leakages, we explained before as well, that these are the accidental basically. All the activities that involve the use of the hazardous materials or the movement of the significant number of vehicles. If there is a more vehicles, there is a more equipment, then there is a chances of the spill and the leakages as well. So the impacts to the soil, groundwater, and the geology of the site may occur. That can be a potential cause of the such impacts are given in the below. But if we deliver the materials during the material handling, during the waste storage and the removal, there is the chances. Then the on-site wastewater treatment, there is a chances on the impact on the soil, groundwater, and the geology. And then if there is a vehicle accident, if there is any accident happen, that can also impact the soil, the groundwater, and the geology of the site. And then the fire explosion, if there is any happen, then the quality of the soil may change because of the change or the removal of the nutrients on the upper layer of the soil. Then a vehicle accident, we already explained as well. Then the fire and the explosion, we also explained that if there is any fire and the explosion, it may alter the quality of the soil because of the removal of the topsoil nutrients. Then we discussed about the cumulative impacts. Expected key cumulative impacts include the following: cumulative alteration to the groundwater, cumulative minor contaminations, stormwater runoff, reducing the area available for the groundwater recharge by replacing unpaved area with paved area, Then improper sanitation arrangement, temporary or the permanent changes in the soil due to the leveling or the excavation. Then we propose some mitigation measures. Adequate storage or the head of the header test water should be provided. The volume of the water for the disposal should be reduced. If chemical use is necessary, then careful selection of the chemicals. Liquid effluent will be handled and disposed according to project HSE plan. All storage tanks will be fitted. The facility shall operate a chemical spill response plan. Then we propose some mitigation measures that all hard standing and the burn will be inspected, perform suitable training, ensuring all equipment is in good mechanical condition, because if there is a no proper mechanical condition of the equipment, then there is a chances of the spill and the leakages. All proper container labeling for chemical, it can avoid the accident as well. All the process area floors shall be fully paved, because if it will not be paved and if there will be any spillages and the leakages, then it can seep into the soil and it can degrade the soil and it can degrade the geology and the groundwater as well. Any spill and the leaks shall be immediately cleaned to avoid spread of the contamination to other areas. Then now we are going to start the geology. Basically, the project that fall under this area, the geology is very unique. Basically, and the principal agent of the transport for these deposits is the wind, because this is one of the desert area. Local geology, based on the review of the literature and the desktop study, the area is identified as comprising of the number of Holocene to recent age phases. There are the different reefs, there are the different sabkhas. These are basically the local terminologies of the geology, because this project is fall under the Ruwais Abu Dhabi area. Then there are the evaporite. Then to the west of the refinery is a small beach deposits as well. So these are the local geology around the project facility. Then there will be no impact anticipated on the local geology, because this project is the basically the expansion of the project. It is the expansion within the facility, and therefore we anticipated that there is no impact on the local geology due to the project activities. Then if you come about the hydrology and hydrogeological resources, basically it is related to the water resources, groundwater resources. The based hydrological investigation, groundwater encountered at the depth ranging from 2.38 to 7.09. Basically, the depth of the groundwater in this region was 2.38, averaging from 2.38 to 7.09. The groundwater level was found deeper in the refinery process area. The groundwater recharge is anticipated to be through rainfall. Basically the method and the channel of the groundwater recharge is only the rainfall. Here you can see the soil and the groundwater testing. Basically we collected some samples from the monitoring well and the boreholes. You can see these are the locations from where we collected some samples. MW belongs to the monitoring wells and the BH is the boreholes. These are some analysis results of the soil water. And in every country, in every region, there are the different parameters with respect to the soil, with respect to the groundwater. But normally there are some US EPA guidelines as well. There is a Dutch standard as well. But every country has its own standard with respect to the soil and the groundwater. So we have collected the soil sample, and the parameters you can see there is the total petroleum hydrocarbon, gasoline range, organics, diesel range, organics, heavy fraction. Then we have sample and analysis for the heavy metals as well, which include antimony, arsenic, copper, cadmium, lead, iron, nickel, cobalt, chromium, barium, and there are the other heavy metals as well. Then we analyze the BETEX as well, which include benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, and other parameters as well. and all the parameters were compared with two kind of the guideline. With one is the Dutch intervention, and the second one is the US EPA. Then we collected some groundwater analysis as well. We collected some groundwater sample as well, and the sample were analyzed and the parameters were analyzed with the Dutch intervention values. The parameters were pH, electrical temperature, total suspended TDS, BOD, COD, oil and grease, and some heavy metals as well. Based on the soil and the groundwater analysis result and the further comparison with respective Dutch standard, for the soil and the groundwater, all the parameters, some of the parameters basically exceeding the limit, remaining all were in the prescribed limit. In the same way, with respect to the soil, some of the parameters were not detected. Some have some values, and some were within the limit, and some were exceeding the limit as well. And with respect to the terrestrial ecology, as we mentioned before as well, this project fall under the within the existing facility. So therefore, we did not carry out the detailed terrestrial survey. But yes, the desktop study was carried out. The desktop survey was carried out, and the studies, the data was collected. But on the basis of the ENVID and on the basis of the review of the document, there is no impact anticipated on the terrestrial ecology, because this project fall under the existing facility. Then we are going to start the noise. We collected the baseline data for the noise. We carried out the noise survey. We used the equipment for example, Bruel and Kejur. We used model number 2250 and 4231. We carried out the noise for the day and the night. In every country there is a separate standard. For example, in some country there is a continuously one standard limit for the 24 hour, but here we have the separate limit for the day and the night. So we carried out for the day and the night. Then we evaluate the impact as well during the construction and the operation. The activities that can generate the noise, that is the site work, the operation of the construction equipment, movement, welding and cutting, routine operations, operation of the control valves and the depressing valves, and operation of the emergency vents. Then we mention about the cumulative impact. There are no future development planned within the surrounding project. The cumulative impact associated with the future development will have the following aspect: noise and vibration as a result of the construction, and increased noise level due to the vehicle traffic movement. Then mitigation measures for the cumulative. We did not propose any additional mitigation measures for the cumulative impact. But for the construction and the operation phase, we propose some mitigation measures. All vehicle, plants and the machinery to be fitted with the effective exhaust silencer. We propose that there must be a silencer system in the plant and the machinery. Then we propose that the diesel generator should be provided with noise enclosure. Any machinery which is intermittent in use should be shut off in the period of non-use. If the machinery which is required in the intermittent, then must be shut off in the period of the non-use. Some of the mitigation measures we proposed about the PPEs must be provided. Periodic noise monitoring shall be carried out. Site layout to maximum natural screening. Then we propose some monitoring program as well, that the EPC contractor shall monitor the noise level during commissioning and prior to the handover to the project. Now we are going to start the traffic. Basically, in the traffic, it is there are basically the traffic study. There are the different kinds of the studies. But with respect to the study, environmental impact assessment, we only mentioned that what are the near main roads and what are the infrastructures are available, and what are the roads available, what kind of infrastructures are available in this particular project. And accordingly, and although this project is also in the existing facility, so we do not feel any increase in the traffic due to the project facility. But somehow we propose some mitigation measures. We do not require any additional road network for this proposed project because it is already existing project, and the existing road is enough to execute this project. Then the peak traffic time considered unavoidable will be immediately prior to work shift commencement. Then the material deliveries, waste collection and the product collection should be scheduled between these two periods. We have to consider the peak time to avoid the traffic congestion. So we should monitor and we should deliver and we should schedule the delivery of the materials, waste collection and the product collection as per the peak time. Then we propose some monitoring measures during the construction phase. The appointed contractor will be required to have all internal construction road sign posted for the allowable road speed. If necessary, HSE team may impose restriction on those violating road rules such as temporary or the permanent suspension of the vehicle. Then with respect to the socio-economic environment, as we mentioned before as well, that this project is already in the existing facility. So there is no as such significant environmental impact on the socio-economic, although there is a positive impact on with respect to the socio-economic because of this project there is a increase in the GDP ratio, there is an increase in the job opportunities, so there is a positive impact due to this project on the socio-economic conditions. Then we propose some environmental action plan as well. In the construction stage, we proposed air quality shall be monitored on the weekly basis, and the responsibility we also fixed. Noise level at the several locations within the work site should be monitored. It should be bi-weekly. Hydro test we pre-commissioning. Liquid effluent quantity of the sewage produced from the work site, it must be on a daily basis. Resource consumption on a daily basis. Then during the operation phase, we also propose some environmental action plan. For example, groundwater and the land contamination. Existing groundwater monitoring shall be carried out annually. Noise level must be carried out quarterly. Air monitoring shall be as per the recommendation of the stacks. Then annual report shall be carried out annually. Then the calculation of the emission must be annually. Then the greenhouse emission calculation must be annually. Then the wastewater treatment on the requirement basis, stormwater prior to the release. Then the waste audit must be carried out to assess, ensure and monitor compliance with the approval conditions. It must be annually. And then with respect to the waste monitoring audit or audit for the facility housekeeping, it must be carried out on the annual basis. As we before mentioned about the project alternatives, that we have to consider some alternatives as well with respect to some site location, with respect to some best technology as well. So we also carried out project alternative for this particular project. So no development option. In the no development option represent a situation where the project will not be implemented. In such a case, both the positive and negative impact of the project implementation do not occur. But if we alter the site selection, in this case project site has been proven suitable, because why the relocation cannot be possible, because it is already in the existing facility. So there is no relocation option considered and no site alternative were considered. Then on the basis of the identification of the impacts, on the basis of the evaluation, we concluded, we made a conclusion and some recommendation as well, that the air quality monitoring data provided by the company exceedance of the particulate matter. Air dispersion modeling reveals basically no significance in the ground level concentration, no interaction with the marine ecology, and no significant terrestrial ecological impact. The groundwater results are provided by the company. All the parameters are in compliance. Some are the accidents in the soil. Noise level values are in compliance with the applicable standards except noise level at the night. Then on the basis of the conclusion and all these studies, we put some recommendation as well. For example, Noise assessment shall be carried out for the equipment and the machinery. Air quality monitoring shall be carried out during construction and the operation. Identification of the inventory of the fugitive emissions. Then LDAR program shall be implemented. This LDAR we already explained. Then the leak detection and the repair program shall be provided to identify leakages from molten sulfur. So these are the recommendation and the conclusion on the basis of the impact identification and evaluation. So this is all about our presentation.